The wind howled across the open plains like a wounded beast, carrying dust and the ghostly echo of a world that seemed to have forgotten mercy. The wind howled across the open plains like a wounded beast. The sun had long since bled out behind the ghostly silhouette of the western hills, seemed to have forgotten mercy. Leaving the world draped in a cold, the sun had long since bled out behind the jagged silhouette. The only sound was the slow creak of an old windmill spinning above a lonely ranch. The only sound was the slow creak of an old windmill spinning above a lonely ranch. Hawk Ranch, a place spoken of by few and visited by few, had lived here alone for 5 long years. Its owner, John Hawk, ever since the day his wife died, for 5 long years. Every plank of that house remembered her laughter. Every plank of that house remembered her laughter. Every fading photograph, every piece of furniture, every fading photograph, every piece of furniture held a story. To change a thing, couldn't bring himself to change a thing. The curtains she'd sewn by hand. Not the piano that sat collecting dust, not even the mug that had been hers. Not even the mug that had been hers. He lived quietly, wordlessly. He lived quietly, and only the horses and cattle bore witness to his grief. And only the horses and cattle bore witness to his grief. He rose before dawn each day, because routine was the only thing that kept his mind from drowning in silence. Because routine was the only thing that kept his mind from drowning in silence. Checked the water lines. He fixed fences, and tried to lose himself in work. Checked the water lines, and tried to lose himself in work. And with them came memories. But no matter how hard he worked, he would sit on the porch, drink his coffee, and stare at the horizon where she had once stood waving at him with her shawl dancing in the wind. And stare at the horizon. It had been a lifetime ago, yet every breath he took still carried with her shawl like a prayer he didn't dare speak aloud. Dancing in the wind. That night was colder than usual, the kind of cold that crawls under your skin and makes the fire burn lower. He took still carried her name like a prayer he didn't dare speak aloud. John wrapped his old coat tighter around him and went to check on the horses in the kind of cold that crawls in. Your lantern swung and the fire burned lower, its golden light cutting through the darkness. How much would you throw in? The barn sat at the edge of his property, half collapsed, tighter around him, and went to check. He hadn't been inside the far barn before turning in, but tonight something pulled him swung in his hand. Maybe it was its golden light cutting through the darkness in trembling arcs. The horses had been restless all day, at the edge of his property, and his old dog, Buck, had been growling toward the hills since sundown. He hadn't been inside it for months. John pushed open the heavy door, but tonight the hinges screaming in protest. Maybe it was the air inside, or maybe it was dust and the scent of hay long gone stale. The horses had been restless all day. He stepped forward cautiously, the lantern light dancing along the wooden walls, had been growling toward the hills since sundown. Then he froze. John pushed open the heavy door, the hinges screaming in protest, muffled. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of hay long gone stale. His hand went instinctively to the revolver holstered at his side. He stepped forward cautiously, the lantern light dancing along the wooden walls, his voice low, commanding, then he edged with unease. There it was, no one answered. Sound. Only faint, the whisper of wind through the gaps in the boards. A rustle of chains. He took another step forward. His hand went instinctively to the revolver holstered at his side. Softer this time. Who's there? A groan. He called out, his voice low, commanding, the unmistakable sound of a human breath. No one answered. He moved toward the far stall, the whisper where the shadows were gaps in the boards. The lantern's light took another step against the wood, revealing a figure. Then, small, he heard it again, frail, softer this time, himself. A groan. Chains glinted faintly at the wrists and ankles. The unmistakable sound of a human breath. He thought his mind was playing toward the far stall, where the shadows were figure stirred. The lantern's light trembled against the wood, his breath catching in his throat, revealing a figure, small, the person was alive, curled in on itself. Dirt and bruises covered their skin, at the wrists, torn rags clung to their body, and blood had dried at the corner of their lips. Second, he thought his mind was playing tricks on him. But then the figure stirred. Good Lord! He whispered, his breath catching in his throat. The person was alive, but barely. Dirt and bruises covered their skin. Torn rags clung to their body. And blood had dried at the corner of their lips. Their eyes, half open, stared at him as if seeing a ghost. Don't be afraid, John said quietly, setting down the lantern and crouching beside them. You're safe now. He reached for the chains. But the moment his fingers brushed against the cold metal, the person flinched violently. Hey, he murmured, trying to keep his voice calm. It's okay. I won't hurt you. For a long, tense moment, neither of them moved. Then, with trembling hands, he unlatched the first shackle. The metal scraped against raw skin. The sound of it broke something deep inside him. He couldn't imagine what kind of cruelty had left someone like this here, in his barn. Of all places. When the last chain fell away, the person collapsed into his arms, too weak to hold themselves upright. Their head rested against his chest. And for the first time, John heard their voice. It was soft, broken. Almost like the echo of a prayer. They whispered a single word. A name. His wife's name. John froze. Every muscle in his body turned to stone. His mind raced. That name hadn't been spoken on this land in years. No one knew it. No one dared to say it, not even him. He pulled back slightly, searching the stranger's face in the dim light. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice rough, almost trembling. But the stranger didn't answer. Their eyes fluttered closed. And they slipped into unconsciousness, leaving him there, kneeling on the barn floor, holding a broken soul who had just spoken the name of his dead wife. For a long moment, John didn't move. The storm outside howled louder. Wind slamming against the barn doors. As if the night itself wanted to drag this secret back into darkness. His heart pounded like thunder in his chest. He could still hear the faint echo of that whisper repeating in his head, soft, mournful, and hauntingly familiar. He gathered the fragile body in his arms and carried them back to the ranch house, the lantern swinging wildly as he pushed through the wind. The old dog followed, whining low, sensing something strange in the air. Inside, John laid the stranger on the couch by the fire. He covered them with a blanket, his hands shaking as he poured a cup of water and tried to coax a few drops between their lips. As the flames flickered, he studied the faint light on their face. There was something eerily familiar there, something he couldn't place. The curve of the lips, the tilt of the chin. His heart ached in a way it hadn't in years. He turned his gaze toward the photograph above the mantel, his wife's portrait. The same eyes. The same shape of the face. For a heartbeat, his soul stopped. He forced himself to look away. "You're just tired, old man," he muttered, under his breath. "Seeing ghosts where there ain't any." But deep down, he knew this was no illusion. The whisper had been real. The name was real. And somehow, fate had dragged something, or someone, into his life that was tied to the past he could never bury. John sat by the fire all night, watching over the stranger. Every now and then, they stirred, murmuring incoherent words. Once, their hand reached out, as if seeking something, or someone, they'd lost. He caught it gently, just as he used to when Sarah's fever took her. It felt too real, too close. Outside, dawn began to creep over the horizon. The first light of morning spilled across the floorboards, touching the stranger's face with gold. John leaned back in his chair, eyes heavy but alert. He didn't know who they were or what kind of hell had brought them to his ranch. But he knew one thing: this wasn't a coincidence. Fate had brought this broken soul to his doorstep for a reason. And that whispered name. It wasn't done with him yet. He looked at the photograph again, whispering under his breath, "If this is your doing, Sarah. If this is you sending me a sign, then I'll listen." The fire crackled. The wind outside quieted. And in that fragile silence between night and day, John Hawk realized that his lonely life was about to change forever. Morning sunlight spilled across the ranch, golden and cold. John sat at the edge of the couch, watching the stranger stir beneath the blanket. The night storm had passed, but something heavier still hung in the air. When her eyes opened, wide, lost, trembling, he saw fear there, but also something else. Something that pierced him to his core. They were the same eyes his wife once had. "Easy," he said quietly. "You're safe here." The stranger flinched at his voice, glancing around the room like a wounded animal. Her lips trembled, forming no words, only a faint whisper, barely audible, like wind through dry grass. John leaned closer, catching fragments of sounds that meant nothing and everything at once. "Who did this to you?" he asked. She didn't answer, only stared at the fire with tears gathering in her eyes. Her wrists were bruised where the chains had been. And John felt anger burning in his chest. Whoever had done this hadn't just hurt her, they'd tried to erase her humanity. He brought her soup, water, a soft blanket. She ate slowly, her eyes never leaving his face, as if searching for something she couldn't find. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft and hollow. "This place feels familiar." John froze. "You've been here before?" She shook her head, uncertain. "No. But it feels like I dreamed of it once." The hills, the barn, even you. His throat tightened. He wanted to dismiss it. To chalk it up to confusion or fever, but deep inside, his heart stirred in ways he couldn't control. She looked at him like someone who had known him long ago, someone who remembered things he'd buried with his wife's grave. That night, as the fire dimmed and she finally slept, John sat alone on the porch, staring into the dark. The name she'd whispered in the barn echoed through his head again and again. He couldn't explain it, but he felt it. Something tied her to the woman he'd lost. Maybe by blood. Maybe by fate. Or maybe by something even deeper. The wind carried a soft whisper through the grass. It almost sounded like his wife's voice, gentle and sure. Don't turn away from her, John. He looked back toward the door. Toward the stranger sleeping inside his home. And his heart knew the truth, whatever she was. She hadn't come to destroy his past. She'd come to finish what it had left undone.